My name is Kenya Edison. I have the honor of introducing our next presenter, Kiki Ferris. Kiki is the Contra Costa County probation manager responsible for prevention, placement, and juvenile and adult investigations. She began her career as a probation counselor in juvenile hall 3 months after earning her bachelor's degree in criminal justice administration from Cal State Hayward in 2003. Her body of work includes a wide range of community supervision and court work, and becoming the departmental foster care expert as placement supervisor from 2016 to 2020. Throughout her career, she has applied the authenticity of lived experience as an underprivileged child and young parent from Oakland, and is known for her unconventional spirit, collaborative nature, and passion for betterment. Please help me welcome Kiki Ferris. You have her attention for the next 2 hours. Thank you.
All right. Well, I have a cheering section back here in the last row. My chief is here, as well as our current placement supervisor. So as Ms. Kenya said, I am Kiki Ferris. I am super grateful that you're here. I do have one tiny little disclaimer, and that is that the description that you read doesn't cover the entirety of what we're going to do today, so I hope that you will be very pleasantly surprised by what we're going to talk about. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. First, also, this young lady right here asked a question. I just want you to know that this slideshow is available online as a part of the class presentation, so you don't need to write down any of the stuff you see up here. Okay? So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to first have an introduction to juvenile probation. I'm doing that because we often, even those of us who work for probation agencies, have not done everything under our roof. And you would be surprised how many people that work in your department don't actually know all the processes, or maybe you won't be surprised. We'll see. So we're all going to do an intro to juvenile probation, and then we're going to have a discussion about racial equity for sure, like the title suggests. And then I'm going to tell you a story, because I was raised by a storyteller, and that's what I do best. I'm going to talk to you about kind of where we were before CCR was implemented in 2017, and bring you up to where we are now. So we're going to retrace the steps of reform. And then we're going to recap, and hopefully we have some time for a discussion. Also, what I want you to know is that this is very much less of a presentation and more of a conversation. Fortunately, we're not on Zoom. I don't have to unmute anybody. There's no technical difficulties about hearing you and all that good stuff. So if you have something to say, I really invite you to say it. This is a discussion, as far as I'm concerned. All right, so let's jump right in. You've all been drafted. You see that little note down there? All right, so first let's talk about the intake flow. And I'm a mover, so y'all don't be surprised if I go sit down in one of those chairs. This represents the intake flow for the juvenile probation system. What's important to take away from this is the huge amount of responsibility that comes along with the processes that we have and sort of the entrance ways into the various systems. So the green box that starts is really the trigger point, if you will. An offense occurs, the police are contacted, there's some kind of law enforcement contact there. The sort of yellowy orange boxes represent the options that the police agency has, right? So no action at all, diversion on the police level, a misdemeanor arrest or felony arrest, depending obviously upon the circumstances. It's important to also know, even though it's less likely in modern times, that either the misdemeanor or the felony arrest could result in some juvenile hall booking, right? For the purposes of this conversation, we won't worry so much about that. I just want you to know that there's an option for either of those, and that is what would trigger the next wave of intervention. So the top orange colored boxes represents probation. So anytime that a youth is arrested for a misdemeanor offense, that comes to the probation agency. That is our entranceway, if you will, which comes with an enormous amount of responsibility. We refer to them, certainly for misdemeanor arrest or contacts that happen out of custody, as out of custody referrals. At that point, the probation officer who receives that referral has those options that you see there. They can close it at intake. They can close it and refer to services and resources. They can enter an informal contract, or what I used to call the double top secret probation. Or they can request a misdemeanor petition from the DA. And then down below, the dark red, I didn't do that intentionally, no offense to DAs. If it's a felony arrest, it's something we refer to as a direct file that goes to the DA. They have similar choices. The DA can decline to file for a number of reasons. Sometimes they might route it back to the police agency for more information, so on and so forth. They can do diversion at their level. They can route it to us, probation for a misdemeanor resolution, which has happened. Or they can simply file the felony petition, either how it's alleged or differently according to their investigation. And then you see at the very end are other points of DA intervention, which is that they decline to file the misdemeanor or they file the misdemeanor. So that's what you have there. So then after the DA filing of either one of those types of petitions, misdemeanor or felony, starts the court process. I think, Law and Order really sold us a dream, right? Because when you grew up watching Law and Order and Perry Mason and Matlock like I did, you got accustomed to a very different language. And then, right, you start working for agencies like ours and we reinvent the wheel. And all of a sudden, words don't mean what you thought they meant, right? So juvenile probation has a very different language. But we do agree on arraignment. Arraignment still means arraignment, which is the first appearance. And if the young person is in custody, a lot of times we refer to that as a detention hearing. The judge might make interim orders, things they can't do in order to stay out of custody at that time. And then from there, the next court hearing or hearings, there could be one or dozens, are what we call pretrial conferences. Really just opportunities for both sides to prepare, investigate, and then if an admission happens for the petition, it generally happens at this pretrial conference. From there, if there is no admission, we move into contests, and it's not like, a dance contest or anything, it's the trial. So the trial is obviously, right, we know what trials are, where testimony and evidence is presented, and then if the court makes a true finding, that petition is sustained. From there, once the finding is made, we move to disposition, which is the sentencing. The minor probation and the attorneys make recommendations to the court, and then obviously the court ultimately decides what is going to happen next. And in my county, the lovely Contra Costa, these are some of the options that we have. And I won't read through them, but basically there's a community bubble, there's an institutional commitment bubble, and there's an out-of-home placement bubble, which we all know a lot about here today. So for the purposes of where we're going to go with this conversation, I want you to focus on probation's point of intersection, on this misdemeanor arrest path and the options that probation has. So again, the out of custody referral, as we like to call it, is our personal gateway to the juvenile justice system and the entrance point over which we have an incredible amount of control and authority. At this point, this is when probation becomes aware that there is a misdemeanor referral from the police agency and decides to do one of those things. So looking more closely at the DPO's role in this process, this is what happens, right? So after a review of the police report, the PO decides there's no intervention, they'll decide to close. If the probation officer decides after reviewing the police report, the circumstances, maybe the youth and the family could use a soft touch, they can make referrals to services, and they can decide, I'm just going to refer, I'm still going to close. There's not going to be any further intervention by probation. Then moving up the chain, the DPO might decide to enter an informal probation contract with the youth or family. I hope if I turn on the right side here. So what that usually looks like is a 3 to 6 month, and it's literally a contract, right, that you review. You might come up with terms like maybe a curfew if that was an issue, listening to your parents, maybe even doing community service, writing a letter of apology, things like that, designed to be restorative, right, to address the situation for which the young person was referred, but it's not an end of the world type of situation. Probably the most memorable of these that I've had is a family, 2 kids actually, that were referred to me for an out of custody referral when I worked in our West County office. And, in true, raise your hand if you have a teenage boy or any boy between the age of 12 and 16. Okay, okay? I don't like them, okay? I've had 2, okay? And this is very, I'll tell you, I read the police report and I thought, my kids are dumb enough to do this. Like, I just knew it. So these 2 teenage boys go to your local strip mall place, right, where there's this beautiful water fountain that's meant to be a decoration, and what do? They put dishwashing liquid in it. And what does it do? It turns into like a Tom and Jerry cartoon scene, and there's suds all over the place. They thought it was hilarious. The people who run the fountain did not agree. So there was some work to be done. And they were, when I'm telling you, shaking in their boots to come and talk to me, they probably remember it today like I remember it today. But needless to say, they didn't need to be entered into the juvenile justice system. We just had a really proactive police agency in their area. And so they paid for the cleaning, they worked it off with their parents, they wrote letters to the victims, so forth and so on. That's one of my most memorable issues that ended up on an informal contract, but not a life or death situation. And then obviously, if the PO reads a police report, makes collateral contacts, considers circumstances, and maybe if the offense is actually something that's referred that's statutorily ineligible or unsuitable for informal, they can forward that case to the DA for filing. And that happens too. Just a note sort of about what we're looking for, what we're talking about when things might be statutorily ineligible or unsuitable. In the WIC code 654.3, there's pretty much a list, I want to say 7 numbers of things, types of offenses that are ineligible for informal. And then as far as unsuitability, we're talking about any offenses that are still misdemeanor, right? But there is a risk indicator, like a DUI offense. There's some kind of harm to the person or property of someone. Maybe there's a mention of gang affiliation or some kind of something else going on that you get a whiff of. Or maybe the parents are sitting there and you're talking to them and they're like, you know what, I've had it. I've done everything I can. I want formal intervention. This is not working. So those types of things are some of the factors that we might consider when we are trying to make a decision about should this case be forwarded to the DA for filing consideration. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions about probation's role and kind of the options that exist for intervention at the misdemeanor referral level. Good, because you're all probation officers now. All right, so as a juvenile probation officer, your job includes what we have just covered, which is the processing of out-of-custody referrals. You sure you don't have any questions? Because you said you were an expert. All right, so part of your job is that you're going to carefully review referrals and you're going to consider the least restrictive response. Remember, that is our job, to do only what is necessary in order to provide the level of intervention that the situation requires. Your supervisor, who I've heard is, one of those supervisors, is really going to review your work. So it's very important that in your review of this situation, you make sure that you really substantiate the reasons why you chose the option that you chose. Everybody got that? Okay, and Ms. Kenya is going to help me now. By giving you all a copy of your out-of-custody referral. So you'll notice as this comes around, it has a more official title. I just call it a out-of-custody referral. But it's actually the Contra Costa County Probation Department Intake, Disposition, and Complaint Record, which is why you see why I call it an out-of-custody referral. All right? So this is a document that you, the newest juvenile supervision deputy, is going to receive, that is going to have a police report attached to it. You're going to use it to record your investigation, your evaluation, and your recommended action. And because you are a stellar DPO, you see that you've already decided that some contact was necessary. There's your form. So you've read through this police report and you have decided that you needed to contact the youth, the parent, and the school. Okay? So the primary sections of this referral cover these areas here. You're going to notice that on the cover page, there's basic information, your referral number, which is 101 up in the right corner. Why we use the hundreds, I don't know, but 101 signifies that that is the very first time that this young lady has been referred to probation. You'll see there's contact information, the charge there. Who can tell me what the charge is? Thank you. And there's a dispo section where you record what you decide to do. And then on page 1, you'll notice more demographic factors and admonishment section. Page 2, there's some admit and deny information about the child and the family. And page 3, there's information about the school, other significant info, as well as an empty section where you will evaluate your case based on the facts that you have determined. In order to get to that evaluation, it's basically a 3-step process, right? You're going to investigate. So now that you've consulted the necessary parties and you have that information there that you learned, you're going to compile those notes and you're going to ask yourself, what have I learned about the youth in the situation? You're going to evaluate, right? You're going to decide, is intervention necessary? Like, why or why not? Using what you've learned, what are the next potential steps that are necessary in this situation? And then you're going to recommend. You're going to close it, you're going to refer it, you're going to intervene with informal, or you're going to request a file. But you must be ready to substantiate your recommendation, because remember what I said about your supervisor, okay? So you're going to read the referral carefully, make any highlights that you need, things that stand out for you, things that helped you make your decision, and then you're going to discuss it with your imaginary unit. And what I would recommend is the person next to you or some people around you gather together, share your thoughts. What I want you to know is that you don't have to agree. So if you 3 decide to discuss it over here and you all come up with 3 options, that's perfectly fine, because that's your opinion about how you would handle it. But what I want you to do is hear the other person's ideas and let it bounce off one another. There could be many situations to address, right? Many ways to address the situation. There isn't necessarily a right or a wrong, but what I want you to understand going into this is that your decision could lead to a different outcome for this child. All right, are there any questions at this point? So again, here are your 4 choices that I'm going to leave on the screen. You're going to investigate, evaluate, and make your recommendation. And I think, because it's only 3:03, let's take 10 to 15 minutes. I'll see how, if you guys are all talking about getting more cookies, then I'll go ahead and wrap it up. All right, so don't be afraid, talk to each other, read through it, and remember your steps. All right, we're gonna get into it. First of all, I kind of want to know who's in the room. So if you work for a probation agency, raise your hand. Oh, a lot of those types in here. What about the Child Welfare Agency, CDSS? Okay, that's why y'all was struggling. I already know what was happening. Behavioral health. Okay. Anybody else? Where do you guys work? Okay, yes, our state. We know who you are now, Mr. Gaines. You have all the answers for this child. All right, anybody else that is from a different type of work environment? Okay, just wondering. Okay, so let's get into it. So can somebody be a brave volunteer and just give me some thoughts about the demographic factors? So what did you learn on the cover page and page 1? Where is my document? I have all the pages. Can I get a copy of it? Ms. Kenya, can you give me a copy of the referral? I didn't do mine double-sided. Thank you, ma'am. All right. So, demographic factors. What can you tell me, somebody, about the cover page and page 1? What do we know about this female?
1 second, let me get the mic to you.
Just raise your hand nice and high so Ms. Kenya can find you. Thank you. Yes.
All right, so we're learning that she's a 17-year-old black
Okay.
female. You learn a little bit about her family situation, living with adult male dad. Mother's location is unknown, so you're going to have some separation of the intact family there.
Okay.
And again, I think I heard you say, I couldn't find it, but you said that there's no prior delinquent history, right?
Right, because it's referral 101, so
Okay,
that tells you that.
That
Yep.
means, yeah. So a lack of delinquency is what you're saying. So first petition for misdemeanor 242.
Wow, look at all that he learned just from those few little boxes. So yes, there are some ideas I thought people might say, okay? Who can talk to me about, if I can figure out what page I'm on, about the admit deny section at the top of page 2. Can somebody maybe read that section for us so we can talk about what the facts and the statement were involved in this? Somebody raise your hand. We've all been to college. Somebody, please. Thank you.
Read the whole thing. Spoke to minor female, adult male, and school administrator by phone. Minor female admits to striking the student after a verbal altercation that happened when she confronted the other student after hearing that the other student and her friends were trash-talking on the bus about her and calling her dad an alcoholic. She met the other student at the bench where her and her friend frequently eat lunch. A verbal altercation ensued and the fight began. Fight escalated to several students being involved, and minor female was suspended for fighting and inciting a riot on campus. Victim suffered no substantial injuries.
Thank you. So what are the buzzwords, things that stood out for you, good, bad, or ugly, from this section? She was inciting a riot, okay. She admits it. The victim suffered no substantial injuries, and I'm not like Alexa. I'm just reading it so that, just so you know, I don't have like Tourette's or anything. Anything else? Any other buzzwords, things that stood out for you in this section? Things that she was busy over here with this red pen, so I know she has something underlined. Dad is an alcoholic. Okay. All right. She was suspended. That's the only other thing I think I put up here. That there were multiple students involved. That's probation types always look at that sort of factor. Okay. I'll read the child section. So, minor female at 17 years old, only child, single father. She has attended the high school since 10th grade. She has a job, no history of therapy, and no extracurricular activities at this time. Says she has a few friends at school, none in her neighborhood. She said she was not friends with the victim before the altercation, and as far as she is concerned, the conflict is resolved. Minor female is articulate and respectful. She reported no concerns about abuse in the household. Regarding the alcoholic comment, she said her dad only drinks on the weekends and it causes no disruption. Buzzwords here, things that stood out for you here. She has a job. The conflict is resolved. Somebody said she's respectful. You guys are so strength-based. I love it. Okay. You might also have noticed she's an only child, right? She has a single father as a parent. She says she only has a few friends. And she says, no, if there were some child welfare folks in here. So I did a mock presentation with some of our internal county folks on Friday, just mostly to help get my own nerves out. But there were some child welfare administrators there, and whew, they were all about the abuse and the CFS report. So it's interesting how our different sort of areas of expertise will definitely come out in situations like this. All right, what about family? Is someone brave enough to read the family section at the bottom of page 2? Thank you, sir. I'm giving out prizes after, just so you know.
Minor female resides with only dad since age 4. Mother's whereabouts are unknown. Dad is unemployed, senior citizen, veteran. Dad said he only drinks alcohol on the weekends, no drug use. Family lives in a small apartment with a lot of neighborhood police activity. Closed CFS referrals found for minor female aged 4, 12, and 16. Family has moved frequently.
All right, well, that's a loaded few lines. So what stood out for us here? A missing mother. A veteran. Moving frequently, and the father's unemployed. What was the other thing? The CFS referrals. I think, did somebody say something about drinking? The drinking only on the weekends, like a lot of other folks I know, right? Okay. So yes, the mom is MIA. The dad is a vet, but he has no job. There's something going on in this neighborhood, right? And there has been some CFS referrals. And then school. So flip the page, and I think I can handle this section. She goes to Urban High School. She's in the 11th grade. She has attended this school since the start of the 10th grade. Her school records reflect that she earned all A's during the first year and at previous schools, mostly A's in the beginning of the current year, but her grades have reduced to no A's, mostly B's and C's during this current semester. Her attendance is sporadic to first and fifth period, and she's attended more than 25 schools in several cities and states. So what stands out for you here? 25 schools, right, that's a lot of schools for somebody in the 11th grade. Say that again? The drop in grades. Yes?
Another thing that stands out to me is that although the father is minimizing the drinking to confining it to weekends, there's enough notice somewhere else for the other girls, the trash talking, to have focused on the dad's drinking.
That's a very good point. Did everybody hear his point? Very good point. Anything else here? Her attendance is sporadic to first and fifth period, absolutely. And then lastly, the other significant information, we have here that there's no other disciplinary entries in her school record. The administrator reported that the minor asked to get her homework when she was suspended and said she was going to work during her 5-day suspension. Anything significant? Well, it's the other significant information. So clearly you thought it was significant. So what was significant about it? Anything that stands out for you? She asked to get her homework. And she's going to work during this 5-day suspension. No other discipline. So her first referral, we knew that, right? And no other discipline records. Was there any information that was missing for you that you wish you know more of when you were trying to make a decision, which we'll get into next? A lot. Tell me some a lots, but Miss Kenya has the microphone. Raise your hand. We want to hear it.
I can say it. I want to know about those referrals, the CPS referrals.
You want to know about the CFS referrals? Okay.
But I did all that to bring you the mic.
So now you say it all over again.
I had to duck low, crawl down. These are aged knees, vintage. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I thought I saw a hand over here. Miss Pretty in Pink right here. She has a.
So for us, it was the school first and fifth period. We wanted to know, like, is it a transportation issue with dad, or why she's coming late? Or is it because she's working and she's sleepy in the morning? Or is it because the school, she's struggling in those classes and she needs tutoring services or something? So we wanted to know a little more why she's just missing first and fifth.
Okay, and where do you work again?
Riverside.
Okay, thank you. Miss, if you say something that's going to make me have to come up with answers, I'm sorry.
When we were talking, we were curious about the movement. So this young person has had 25 high schools. So veteran stood up to me. So maybe the movement piece was because father was stationed in various places. So
That's
it's
a
not
good
necessarily the kid's fault. It's just father was a veteran, right? He
Okay.
was serving his country. So
Okay, so she wants to know more about so many movements that required 25 schools. Anything else? Everybody? Yes, ma'am. She's coming.
I just thought it was interesting to know that even though she moved around to 25 different schools, that she thought that school was enough of school that was a priority to maintain her all A's and also hold a job. So it's written in there, but if you don't really look at it that way, you'll kind of miss it. So that's really
Good
important.
point.
So she's able to maintain that as her priority, even
Okay.
given what's going on with her dad.
I like that. Oh, we got 2 more hands over here.
I saw one. Where's the other? I'll come back to you. Okay.
I would have liked to know about her inciting a riot. Like, what did that entail?
Okay.
Ours was the same about the riot.
Inciting a riot? Okay. And this gentleman back here? Got a duck again, Miss Kenya. Duck on down.
I feel bad for you.
Mother is separated / divorced. I'd like to know more about her. Is this recent? Because if they're separated, then that sounds like a more recent thing.
Okay. So now, we're going to get into what your recommendation was. Oh, I'm sorry. One more person, something else?
Oh, it didn't say, I just wondered if any of the other students that were involved in the fight were suspended as well.
Okay, so you would have liked to know what happened with the other folks that were involved, okay? Anything else? I want to over, okay. So we're going to get into your recommendation, and I know you guys are comfortable, but Ms. Kenya actually gave me a really great idea for this next section that would require some of you to get out of your seats and move to a section that would identify what your choice was. So if you're comfortable doing that, I'll ask you to do that. If it's begrudgingly, I'm going to ask you anyway. So if your recommendation for this referral was to close it, simply, no action, no referrals, no nothing, close it intake, I'm going to ask you to move over here in this section of the room. Anybody just want to close it? Oh, okay, there we go. Just move over here by this speaker situation. That would be great. Okay. Okay. And if your recommendation was to close it but to refer to services first, move over here. Oh, wait, y'all might need to just be the people that stay seated. Yeah, the second one was close and refer. Now, you already made your choice now, so no going back. Well, this is going to clear out the room. No, it is. No, oh, you're talking about on the thing. It's on the, it's up here. Yes. Okay, well, listen, I'm not a perfect supervisor, okay? Is there anybody who chose to put the young lady on informal probation? Okay. Okay, and anybody who chose to send it to the DA's office? Okay, good, because I was going to put you guys out. All right. So, let's talk about why. So you guys wanted to close it straight up, right? No, you're not, no, ma'am. Now, I didn't already wrote you up about this. No.
Look on the paper, and that is not enough.
No, ma'am. It was up here. Okay.
Look at the paper. Thank you. See? Because I would
wait a minute.
I would definitely close it out for sure.
Okay.
But given all the things, the underlying issues with the schooling, the movement, and all that stuff, I would for sure try to connect them with something. But
Okay.
definitely for sure close it out.
Okay.
See?
Okay, but why? Why close and refer? What are you, even if you do want to switch sides now, what were the things, what was your, let's go here. What was your reason for wanting to close it?
She's 17, no history of anything. It's a battery. I mean, why are you bringing someone into the system that doesn't need to be exposed to more than what's happening right now?
Okay.
So just pure exposure and a misdemeanor offense, I would definitely close it out. And then with the refer piece of it, that was the other things discussed in the PowerPoint would be the
Okay,
reason
we're going to
why I
let the
refer it out.
refer people
sorry.
speak there. Anything else? Yes, you guys have some other reasons.
I think we always focus on all these things that were concerning, which I'm not saying they're not concerning with all the moves and stuff, but I look at that and I go, wow, she's been through all these moves, she's done all that, and yet she's getting these great grades. Her grades drop, but they're still B's and C's, which is passing. You know, it's the first time she's working. Like, I look at all this stuff and I go, and she's just coming to us now. And yeah, where's everybody else that was involved in the fight? I don't have their referrals sitting on my desk. So.
Okay. Anything else?
The school already suspended her for 5 days, so she
Okay.
already received a sanction.
Okay. That's a fair point.
And I would say, you're looking at the incident, it's one of these incidents that appears to be isolated. So it's not like a pattern or something that's pointing to a buildup of behavior issues.
Okay, that's a great point. Now to our refer people.
All right, the masses.
There's a lot of you, so who wants to speak up for some of the reasons why you thought referrals were necessary before closing?
I just want to get nosy. I want to talk with the dad. I want to talk with the student. I want to talk with the school, and I believe that will take me to my next step.
Okay. So what, learning all that you learned from your investigation here, what are the reasons why you're making referrals? Where are you making them to? What do we need to address?
I would make a referral for like a little bit of family therapy,
Okay.
and I would recommend VA services for the dad because it's part of the family. And
Nice.
VA services are free,
Okay.
so, and they usually they encompass the entire family. That would kind of take care of find out what the alcohol problem is and what other issues, why they might have moved so much if it wasn't because of him being based or stationed somewhere else. So that's where I would look.
Anybody else want to talk about, oh, here we go.
So with schooling, we would recommend possibly maybe she needed some tutoring. Maybe there were some transportation issues in the morning. And then if there's, like he said, veterans for the dad possibly. And then we have one more. That's it.
So tutoring was a big focus for you, youth, family, therapy, veteran services for that, and you said transportation?
We thought that it might be a good idea for her to have a trauma assessment, like see her ACEs score, and the moving around a lot could be traumatic, and then single parent and her grade slipping, trying to find out why that's happening.
Okay. What's interesting, what I'm hearing so far is that a few of you are kind of in the gray spaces in between these possible choices. Because kind of what you're describing, you still want to know information. So really what you might have chosen is what these other two folks chose, which is to have an informal contract with her so you could stay involved.
That was me. I was on the fence.
You were on the fence too? The healthy discussion. Interesting. Sir. Come on.
I was on the fence as well with informal versus refer because she's 17 and this is a last shot for
Right.
services as a minor. So
That's a good point.
if something's going to happen, in the adult system with whatever situations are making are to what that point to what she admits to doing. Here's a last shot to get it for within the system for free and get that family service that they need. Time's ticking.
That's a good point. So her age definitely sounds like a factor for you.
I think I lean towards referral versus informal. First of all, I'm from behavioral health.
Okay.
And we've been making access to mental health on school campuses a priority. And with that, I think referral instead of informal would reduce some of the stigma involved in connection to mental health.
That's a great point.
And it would also, with access at the school, she seems to be doing okay. She has a job. She's focused on her education. I would not want to disrupt that. So I'd want to make sure she was connected with mental health on campus so she would have access without having to rely on transportation. But that's why I would lean towards referral.
That's a great point.
Thank you. I'll use the mic this time. You worked so hard. Yeah. You did. I'd also love to find some way to connect her to some positive, like pro-social activities in her community, whether that's through a community center, and that's just an offering. She doesn't have friends. She doesn't have extracurriculars. She's obviously working hard on school and her job, which is all very positive. She may not have time for a lot of other things, but it sounds like she's taken on a lot of adult responsibility. So it'd be really nice to get her connected to something based on her interests and her strength, and maybe even like a, big sister kind of program or something like that. So just something more into the community.
And I think she had a comment right here.
So my reason, well, along with like everything that everybody said is good, and it's like kind of piggybacking off of you, but I kind of just like thought about, because it was a single isolated incident, maybe she was just having a bad day. Because maybe on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they could have said it, but just Thursday, it was just too much. Because it's not like they said she's gotten into multiple fights because people have called her dad an alcoholic. And I'm sure if those girls were discussing it, it wasn't the first time just to say, but I just like, not to ruin a child's whole life, but just maybe it just might be she was just having a bad day and it was just too much for her that she just couldn't keep going on Thursday.
That's a really good
Those
point.
are my thoughts.
Okay, I want to hear now from the people who actually chose informal. What were your reasons for choosing informal? Oh, yes, that means you. No.
I wanted to hear too. I was stuck.
What were your reasons for placing her on an informal contract with probation?
So that would be like a 654.2, for example, diversion. I think it's a great opportunity to also leverage, like you're talking about referring her to all these services. How do we leverage those support and services? But how do we also hold those service providers accountable, right? I think that's an important component as well. And if you just make the referral, who's to say that, for example, let's say a SED assessment, right? This was a SED use that, you make the referral, but how do we know there was any follow through, for example?
Okay.
And I think that being on an informal, there's no admittance, but there's a way for us to hold also service providers accountable and make sure that those referrals are being upheld and that this young woman is receiving the support and services in a timely manner as well, because this is a very short window of opportunity. She's 17 years of age, and I think there's so many unanswered questions that my inquiring mind would want to like definitely follow through, so that again I can leverage support and services. So it's not about punishing her, but it's about leveraging support and services. And I think as probation officers, that's a big part of our role. It's not just holding youth accountable. Of course, it's community safety, but it's also how do we leverage support and services for oftentimes these youth who wouldn't maybe get it otherwise. So unfortunately, it was a negative event that prompted this, but maybe that was the event that gives this young woman the opportunity to kind of be exposed or have access to these assessments or to these services that maybe she wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to participate in. So I look at it as an opportunity, and for an opportunity for, as a probation department, to also hold these CBOs accountable to making sure that these services are being provided to her and she's not kind of falling through the cracks.
Okay. Round of applause. Is there, before I let you sit down, I just want to know, out of curiosity, because there was a lot of wavering, is there anybody who, after hearing everything, would change their mind? Well, we know you would, so just say, oh no. Is there anybody that would change their mind? No? Okay. You guys, you would put her on informal? Okay. Okay, go have a seat. Thank you for being willing participants. Well, this should be interesting then, this next part. Thank you guys. You guys were such willing, well, I don't know if you were willing, but I appreciate it nonetheless. You don't have to tell me why, but is there anybody that could identify with any parts of this girl's story? Okay, thank you for being honest. Well, the reason I asked that is because this says the people with lived experience that we often want to hire or make referrals to are often already among us in our organizations, because that 17-year-old Kiki and the incident that you read about is an actual incident that occurred when I was 17 years old. Chief, close your ears. So everything in that referral is true. everything. So there's so much to be gained from our lived experience. And I don't think we really take that into consideration enough, because I think that we're always looking for people. And a lot of times I'll be on these Zoom calls and we're talking about, and I'm not talking about us in our county, maybe, but we want to hire people, and I'm thinking, like, have we ever considered who's here already that has the lived experience that might be a gift to our population? Because I think that we're really academic, oh bless us, and we really love our letters behind our names and things like that. But a part of the reason, I like to sneak things into presentations that might not necessarily fit the puzzle, but a part of the reason I chose my own personal incident is because I want you to, if you take nothing else away from this, to understand the value of lived expertise. So there are many other purposes, and I'm gonna ask you if you find any other ones. But also I wanted to bring to light the different perspectives, right, that go into our consideration. As you heard, some of your fellow participants talk about what they would have done it and things that stood out for them. Some of you said things that I didn't even think about, and it's my story. So, oh, you're right. He should have got some services, But I think it's important to hear it, right? Because you all, for the most part, everybody chose one of three choices. Nobody sent me to the DA, thank you. But there was a time in my own career as a PO where we would have, and I have, right? So just understanding and considering that our different perspectives, where our choices stem from, is very, very important. Understanding how our lived expertise and our professional experience combine to really contribute to our decision making is important for me. Another thing that I hope that we would take away from that was just to acknowledge that our differences in opinions or potential action don't necessarily mean that anything is right or wrong, but like I said earlier, understand that the outcomes could be very different based on what you put into your decision. And then understanding that biases might exist, and experience really plays into what our choices are. Highlighting, obviously, what a very important role probation has, because more than half of you obviously are from probation agencies. Is there anybody here who's never had to do this as a part of their career, that never had this assignment to do intake referrals? Yeah, so there's a chance that some people really don't fully understand that entrance point for probation. And there's plenty of stuff that we don't have any control of, which largely the public doesn't seem to understand, but this thing we do. So really pouring all of what you have to offer into that, and really being careful about under action and over action, right? Because there's a lot of potential outcomes. And then I think it's important that a lot of you immediately acknowledge strengths. You immediately saw the bigger picture. You had questions about things that weren't there, and you were not afraid to think outside the box. Was it your question? Who said something about the nature of the CFS referrals? I forget who it was. Somebody said something about wanting to know about the CFS referrals. One thing, we make decisions kind of in the dark, right? We don't know what's gonna happen. I think I might have turned out okay. I passed the background check because I'm here. So, but you don't know. And like one of you brought up the CPS referrals, I very much at 17 years old was not prepared to say or to acknowledge that my dad was an alcoholic. He was, very much so. I didn't know binge drinking was a thing, but that was what he was doing. He was what you would probably call a functional alcoholic. And he was a different person when he was under the influence and when he wasn't. He had, what I now know after many years in this profession, he had PTSD. He had nightmares about helicopters flying over, the house from Vietnam, like his shirt says. And the inciting in the riot, who asked that question? It came because my stupid friend jumped up on the table. It wasn't even my fault. Anyway, so, so I guess, if there's any other point that you can take from this, there are many. There are many reasons why, and I would probably agree with every one of you who raised your hand and thought of a different reason why I might have chose this particular exercise, when clearly I have a million stories. But also, I wanted you to know that we're among you. that there are people that you work with every day who probably have similar stories, in addition to some of you who raise your hand, who could identify with something. And another thing I wanted to point out to you about 17-year-old Kiki is she was, somebody brought up the schools, the 25 schools. I started, this was at Skyline High School, don't tell me. But I started the first day of 10th grade at Skyline High School, and I finished. If you notice, this happened more than halfway through the 11th grade. I was going stir crazy. I'd spent an entire school year and only 2 grades in my entire life up until this point, and I had been there for a year and a half. I was sick of everybody, okay? I'm an only child. I don't play well with others at the time. I just want to be left, well, that's kind of like I am today. I just want to be left alone. So I was going stir crazy with all the stuff, the CPS referrals, all 3 of them, the root issue was that my dad was drunk. So there was a problem. It just wasn't a problem that I was willing to acknowledge. He certainly didn't acknowledge it with his old stubborn self, bless his soul. But it was there, and it's important to understand that we won't have all the answers sometimes. So we have to, and people lie to us. Whew. They lie to us about how big the problem is. How many people have been working a case and you think everything is fine, and then 3 months later the mom hits you with a phone call and tells you about 27 things that little Johnny has done, all of which she said, oh, it's fine, every time you spoke to her, right? But then the mess hits the fan, and now you have to go, and she wants him out immediately. I mean, people lie to us. We won't have all the information. So the girl in the referral is me. So first of all, and I know we're in professions where we like to see, well, clearly you see how the story ended. I'm here. But this is what happened between then and now. So in 1997, I graduated from that school. Don't do any math. And I had a cumulative GPA of 3.75. And when I walked the stage, I was pregnant with my first son. In 99, I started studying criminal justice at Cal State Hayward. And the Hayward part is really important to me, people. East Bay is not a school. It is like the magazine that we used to look at for shoes that we couldn't afford when I was a kid. Okay, so it was Cal State Hayward in 1999. I graduated from there in 2003 with a corrections focus, which is why I'm here, and I was on the dean's list. So clearly I got my grades together. And by that time, I had 2 sons. So I had this one little boy who had graduated from preschool the day before, so he really understood, because they had a whole, I was like, why do they need a cap and gown? It's preschool. But he had a whole cap and gown, so he was like, oh, my mom's doing it too, and he was like standing on his chair, and he was yelling and screaming, so he was very excited. And my dad, obviously, proud cheering me on. And then in December of 2003, I started this Candyland map through the Contra Costa County Probation Department. So this just tells you kind of where I've been from institution to now. So the time period, right, that you see there from 07 to 2010 is a time period, I'm telling you, that I very much had youth just like this who referred to me for a fight at school that ended up on probation. So it's just a sign of the times, really. I often wonder, after doing this now for almost 19 years, if there would have been an SRO or a PO or somebody at my school at that time, would I have ended up on probation? You know, or I think about how somebody brought up like circumstances, right? Because a lot of people outside of the probation world don't really understand that, yeah, they committed a crime, right? But we're looking at so many other factors, family factors and dynamics. This lady back here, when you were talking about informal and the reasons for it, you were talking about the follow-up and kind of the bigger picture and the other things that needed intervention is really your primary reason. So for you, it sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was less about the fight and more about the family. But think about that. Like, we've been responding to family crises by putting kids on probation for eons. And so now we're kind of getting this under like, ooh, maybe this wasn't the best thing, right? Because what if I would have ended up on probation? I would have violated, because I hated first period. This is somebody else's question. First and fifth period, I hated. First of all, I had to go to Al's to get breakfast during first period. And then fifth period, I had this little math lady in an honors math class who did not respect my intelligence, okay? And she would get mad because I would cut her class and still get the highest grade. And she didn't hide her feelings towards me. I was the only one who looked like me, mind you, in this honors math class. And we just didn't see eye to eye. So half the time I didn't go, and then I would go jack up the curve for everybody else just to kind of piss her off. Okay, that's the truth. So that's what happened. So let's talk about racial equity. Equity is individuality spelled correctly. That is my professional opinion, all right? So in defining racial equity, I am not a racial equity expert, people. They asked me to talk about this, and I was like, are you sure? Because I actually kind of cringe when I see the term out in the world because I always feel like it's being used incorrectly. So what I hope that we do a little bit today of is leave with a demystified understanding of racial equity. So because I'm not the expert, I went to the only expert that I know, which is Google, and I found 3 really comprehensive definitions that I feel like really kind of spell it out fairly simply. This first one is on the United Way website. Racial equity is achieved when race no longer factors into or determines one's socioeconomic outcomes. It is when everyone has what they need to thrive, no matter where they live or how they identify. This next one is from raceforward.org. Racial equity is a process of eliminating racial disparities and improving outcomes for everyone. It is the intentional and continual practice of changing policies, practices, systems, and structures by prioritizing measurable change in the lives of people of color. And then from racialequitytools.org, racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted, in a statistical sense, how one fares. So from these 3 definitions, I really mulled it over in my head because that's what I do. I'm an overthinker. And I thought, you know, these are pretty basic concepts. And so what I have here demonstrates kind of the takeaway from each of those definitions, right? If race no longer factors into or determines one's socioeconomic outcomes, improving outcomes for everyone, and everyone has what they need to thrive, no matter where they live or how they identify. And then that these concepts can be achieved this way, right? By intentionally and continually changing policies, practices, systems, and structures by prioritizing measurable change. And for me, these concepts can be achieved, I believe, by individualized case evaluations and assessments, making thoughtful, considerate recommendations, instead of approaching probation and placement work in particular with a one-size-fits-all mindset. And that's kind of how we are accustomed to doing things. And so if you treat people like individuals, and you're I live on the word intentionally. If you're very intentional about making changes and changing the change, if that doesn't turn out to be the right change, these bubbles over here become a possible thing. So my spin really on racial equity is that you can address racial equity by default if you align your practices to focus on improving outcomes by really trying to give everyone what it is that they actually need to thrive. And I know thrive has been a really a common word today. So this is a quote from the Annie Casey Foundation's website. And I told you earlier I cringe when I see racial equity because I feel like it's used interchangeably with equality. And I put it on this visual to really kind of point out that we're talking about 2 different things when we talk about equity and equality. So equity involves trying to understand and give people what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives. Equality, in contrast, aims to ensure that everyone gets the same things in order to enjoy full, healthy lives. So giving people what they need versus giving everybody the same thing. That really, I feel like, puts it very simply. And if you think about the 17-year-old Kiki example, think about what I needed versus what I didn't need, that you might have given me just because you give it to everybody else. I was an A student. I was smart. I just was walking my own path. What I needed was for somebody to remove the other barriers that were preventing me from really wanting to engage in school, for somebody to address the issue that was in home. I lived in a terrible neighborhood, which I drive by every once and again just to keep me, in reality, rooted in reality. But there were so many things going on that nobody asked about. I was very, very, very independent. I worked, I paid bills, I paid rent, I paid PG&E. I was just, telling me to go, to work development or independent living skills. I would have been, absolutely not. So then I would have got violated on my informal contract, and you probably would have forwarded my petition. So there were things that I just didn't need, right, that we would give to somebody like me in common days, simply because that's what we do. Or that's what the court tells us that we have to do, right? But I don't need it. I didn't use drugs. I didn't, there were things that I would have had to do probably as conditions of informal or certainly on formal probation that would have just created more problems. If you make me come and report to you to drug test when I never smoked weed a day in my life, now I got to not go to work. Now my check's going to be short and things are not going to get done at home. That's going to create more stressors, maybe even more drinking for my dad, So this is a really important concept. I think about it too and just kind of other avenues, right? So, I mean, would you agree that probably someone in the medical profession would say that in order to live full, healthy lives, we should all get more physical activity? Is that fair? Okay. So if I go to the doctor and he's like, Kiki, the pandemic, you sure have been eating a lot, and I'm going to need you to put some more physical activity in your life if you want to have a full, healthy life. And I say, okay, great, doc, so what do you suggest? Now, if he says, you know what, you told me you got a Peloton subscription, you have a Peloton now, so ride that bike a little more, you maybe even do some meditation classes and some yoga, I'm all on it. If he told me I had to run and nobody was shooting, that's not going to lead to a full, healthy life for me. It's just not. So I don't need, if you think running makes everybody great and wonderful and full and healthy and you prescribe that to everybody, that's going to make me miserable. That's the opposite of having a full and healthy life. But we really have to take this away, like really run with it. Because think about whatever you do in your day-to-day work that you might think you're doing the right, because yeah, sure, some of us need the same thing, like air, water. But there are plenty of things that we're not looking at from an equitable standpoint, which we could if we just treat people like individuals. So now we're going to get into this story. I'm going to tell you about a time when it was miserable, okay? Being in placement. The chief wasn't there yet, so she might not even know this story. So it wasn't her fault, okay? But this was definitely a lot of work. So I'm going to tell you the story now of kind of the why and how I sort of accidentally addressed the racial equity and just equity period, right? In my county, because I just thought it was time for us to start treating people like individuals. During this time, our placement screening practices were revamped and individualized from the inception of a case, which is an interesting concept for probation. I started screaming from the mountaintops, even to the people who were doing the intake referrals, right? To kids who put dishwashing liquid in the fountain. Your job is to keep this kid out of placement. They're like, Kiki, what is this? I'm like, no, you don't understand. Your job from the point you look at this referral is to keep kids out of placement. So by doing this, though, we started working more efficiently. We started appropriately addressing the needs of youth and families. And in turn, we dramatically reduced our placement numbers. And when you dramatically reduce the placement numbers, those kids are somewhere. So we were able to also then increase the services to the youth who were at risk. Now, what I want to preface this with is that we are a bean counting county. Okay, so I need you to show me some grace because I have compiled this information from literally from notes and spreadsheets and all sorts of things that I had put together over the time that I was a placement deputy and the time that I was the placement supervisor from 2016 to 2020. So, literally, people, this is no case management, okay? This is bean counting. This is the 1900s in the early part. So in 2011, I left my position as a placement PO, and I had 35 youth, all in group homes, on my caseload. At the time, I went back to the spreadsheet, and there were about 5 or 6 of us DPOs at the time, and all of us combined had 115 youth in the placement unit. All of them were either in a group home, had ran from a group home, or were in juvenile hall pending group home placement, okay? So then in 2015, I looked back at some stuff in preparation for this, and at that one point, there was 165 youth in the placement unit. All of them were in group homes. 2016, I became the placement unit supervisor. It was October, a warm, sunny day, and I volunteered. And then about 2 weeks later, the manager said, oh, and by the way, there's this thing called CCR happening on January 1st. And I was like, wait, what? And I started going to these meetings, and I was like, oh my God, y'all could have told me this before I volunteered. So I look back at the numbers at the end of 2016, there were 75 youth in group homes at the time. And then obviously CCR was implemented in 17. But so these numbers, the point of this, were first of all super high. Lots and lots of kids, all in group homes, no other setting really, fluctuating. I'm quite certain that it probably even got more than 165. Marina, oh, she's not here. Marina was in the unit as well. She's now the supervisor. At one point, she had about 50 kids on her caseload, all in group homes. Yeah. So we're talking, I don't even know how you survive with 50 kids. I don't even know why she still works here after experiencing that. But the more I learned about CCR, I realized that we have to do something differently. Now it is basically becoming mandatory that we put more thought into this process. But what I also realized is that I was fighting an uphill battle because we had a court system that had relied heavily on placement as the answer for everything. If you smoke too much weed, or you cut school too many times, or maybe you have too many fights at school and you have too many suspensions, you need to go to placement. So placement became the all of the above sort of option for all the youth who had been in other settings or at home and just were not cutting the mustard as far as the court was concerned. And so placement orders were just like just a plethora, like all the time. So I started to fight this uphill battle because now we're talking about a system, a process that was in place that had been that way forever. And there had really been no rules about who should go to placement and who shouldn't. So we were all just kind of using our spidey senses when we were screening for these things. And then we were just kind of doing whatever the court said to do, right? Because we're probation. So the numbers were astronomical. And I knew that they couldn't stay that way. But the more I fought with the court and with the attorneys, I realized we might be the problem in the probation department. So I had to first get the rest of the probation department, because we all know we come from probation where placement is a tiny little island in a big old world where there's all kinds of other things going on. So oftentimes you as the placement person are the expert and other people have no idea what your acronyms mean. I've tested them, so I know, right? So the first thing I did when I realized in order to fix the problem with the external partners and get them to play by the same set of rules that I'm learning about for CCR, we're gonna have to change the internal placement screening process. And so this slide, really, I won't read it verbatim, well, I think I'm out, represents what the new Contra Costa County placement process became. And I'm gonna tell you in a second why it was much different. So what we expected was for the investigating PO to do an assessment of the case themselves about the behavioral and therapeutic needs, right? Because CCR put into place some really clear guidelines on what placement in an STRTP should look like. And then they're gonna submit a screening tool to the supervisor who's gonna come back with a response that is not only going to address the CCR standards for STRTP eligibility and talk about whether or not the youth was suitable for placement, which is a separate issue than eligible, but they're gonna rule out community-based treatment and institutional treatment as well. So they're gonna stop looking from just a narrow lens of foster care, but actually expand that concept, right? And then the supervisor is gonna provide a comprehensive response to the PO that's gonna give them all the details about why they said yes or no to eligibility or suitability. And then if they decide the youth is eligible, but maybe, you know, just because you're eligible doesn't mean you need to be removed. Maybe we need to put steps in place to prevent that removal. So then we were going to automatically start to tell people when kids should be considered at imminent risk for foster care. So the old way was that we had a one-size-fits-all screening. We had short, nondescript responses that basically said yes or no, moving on, because the court's going to do what it's going to do, right? And then there was no basis for really accepting or denying placement other than what we had always done. And, oh, this kid is causing some problems. And then the judge, clearly, had the final say, and there wasn't really any basis to refute it. So if they said this little Johnny's going to placement, there was nothing to really say, well, you know, have you considered this? The new way included more specific screening items related to program suitability, elaborate, detailed responses that actually talk about alternatives, right, and permanency planning elements. There were based on STRTP criteria. So you start from just the basics on if this youth even has the bells and whistles that are eligible for an STRTP. And then you ask yourself, even if that's true and it exists, is this still the right setting for this youth? And then instead of the judge simply having the final say with no refute, we had code sections, woohoo, and ACLs, and things started to take a turn. The first time this happened, when I was like, okay, I think I know, I have a template for this now, is this young lady who was 17, much like 17-year-old Kiki, got in trouble, and she had been on probation, and she's 17, and she sat in the driveway of her house, it wasn't the smartest decision, on home supervision and drank a beer. And the court responded with that she needed to go to out-of-home placement. And I was like, not on my watch. And so I said that to myself, of course. And then so then I dug up all the code sections and I wrote this memo and I talked about all the reasons why she wasn't eligible. Number one, she had none of the factors that contributed to STRTP eligibility. It was not a smart decision, but there were other ways to correct it. Her age, all these reasons I put in a memo, and it went to our juvenile PJ. And I held my breath, and I got a court order back that said that the placement order had been rescinded and her home supervision was continued. And I think we all just looked at each other like it worked. But it was like, okay, like they're starting to understand. Like this is expanding. So this is basically the old and the new way. So what I did here is just a visual because I want you to understand how the decline looked for us in group home placements. So the number, again, Bean counting, people, Grace, please, Bean counting. These are actual things that I counted. So from 17 to 2020, this represents the number of overall youth in white and the number of youth in group homes and then STRTPs in red. So you can see how we clearly started to implement these changes and reach a point that by June 2020, which is when I got promoted to manager, you know, the Issa was the chief then. It's her first order of business. No, I was kidding. There were 64 overall youth and 18 youth in STRTPs. What's important to know about us is our next thing that we're going to buckle down on is resource families with our probation youth. But that has never really been a reality for us. And I have to say that a big reason why is simply because our youth come to us very troubled. And so typically, if we're screening them for placement, we're talking about STRTP level placement. We're talking about a kid who checks all the boxes on what you would consider a placement in an STRTP kid. So that top number of 64 youth in 2020, if you notice, there started to be a shift, and we are really, like, they turn 18, y'all, and they want to stay with us forever. Like, currently, we have so many non-minor dependents, and they're off probation, and we're like, you sure you still want to come? And they're like, yes. You know, we started to see a trending shift where we have so many non-minor dependents and very few minors in STRTPs. So that's where we were June 2020. Let me just make sure there wasn't something on it. And basically, yes, so since 2019, the number of NMDs in our placement unit has been consistently much higher than the number of youth in STRTPs. But what I think that represents is what I have here, which is just to show you this shuffling of kids that we had coming in and out of the placement unit. In 2017, there was 43 new placement orders that year and 71 youths whose placement orders were set aside. And then if you move through that, you can see the dramatic difference all the way till we get to 2021, where we only had 13 new placement orders and 18 out. And then today, under Marina's supervision, we have 34 total youth. I think it's still 34 today. And only 8 of them are in STRTPs. And this year, we've only had 1 new placement order, and we've closed 4 cases. This is, I cringed when I had to go back and look at how many kids were being filtered in and out of our placement unit in these previous years. It was just ridiculous, right? So today, it's 20, or I think 12 more of our MDs are turning 21 this year. So that's going to be another super, reduction in the numbers. But it speaks for itself with 8 youth and STRTPs. Yes.
Are your non-minors participating in AB 12?
Yes.
And are the majority 450s, or are they still 602s?
I think, Marina, correct me if I'm wrong, they're more 450s than 602s. Yeah, we only have so that's a great question, because that actually highlights this even more. There's only 4 602 NMDs in that 34 number. So you can do the math, right? So 20 some odd of them are actually 450s who just love us so much that they just want to stay. Okay. So let me see. So the more we fine-tuned our practices and really held our stance with the new system, the less youth we saw coming in and out of the placement unit, which transitioned to us being able to really use our resources ourselves, right? And really focus our attention on the youth who actually were supposed to be in the placement unit in the first place. This, for the administrators in the room, having less numbers does not mean that you have less work. Okay, having less numbers does not mean that you have less work. And certainly there have been a plethora of things that have been added to your to-do list, right? And it's not changing with FFPSA. There's more, and I can't even keep my work group straight at this point. So there's more and more things to do. But what this does is make sure that now we don't have 100 kids to do it for. We are really focusing our energy on the kids that we should have been focusing on from the start. So with this slide, apparently I really wanted y'all to see that because I made it jump. What this slide is for, and I borrowed it from Mr. Kevin O'Connell because I could probably never come up with quite this fancy stuff. I just wanted to point out that clearly we're not the only ones making progress here, because this represents 2007 to 2021. That little number of probation foster care youth in 2007 was 6,061. And for this count in 2021, it was 1,461. So that's a pretty dramatic difference. So clearly we're all doing something, right? And now we're going to retrace the steps. And I would love to tell you that it is rocket science and I am like super smart, but it's not. I was like, they want me to talk about what I did. Okay, so I literally made a list, old school, like pen and paper. And I was like, what all happened during this time? Like, what all did we change? What all did I do? Like, what did we do? And I categorized it because I was like, well, I got to put it on a slide because they want me to stand up and talk about it, right? And I realized that everything landed in 3 different categories. It was either a training issue, a revision, or just rethinking, like just really rethinking. So going back to the definition of how we're supposed to achieve racial equity, according to the Google experts, right, is that we need to be intentional and continual about changing our policies, practice systems, and structures by prioritizing measurable change. So what I realized is when I wrote down all the things that actually were actual realistic steps that we took, they all were in those 3 categories. So let's talk about it. I'm going to talk about some documents. I'm not going to go into them. But if you're interested, if you know me, you know that I'm always sharing stuff and I have an opinion about things, about placement a lot of times. So I am like the template person, right? I have templates that I made when I was a baby DPO because it just made my life easier. So I have a lot of things, and if you need any examples, if you don't already have my email address, you can ask me for those things rather than us going line by line. Because I feel like if we work together, we don't have to reinvent so many wheels. So the training. What I realized, like I said early on, is that we might be the problem. Because this occurred to me one day when I was doing all this work, and a part of the role of the placement supervisor is to do that internal placement screening. And I was, knee deep into everything. It was early 2018. Everybody was still trying to figure it out. And one day I got 8 referrals to consider. So there were 8 kids that were referred to me to determine if they were eligible and suitable for placement. And like one of them maybe had maybe a placement issue. And I was like, oh my God, we are the problem. Like I'm going to court and I'm explaining this stuff to all the outside agencies, but our own people are not understanding the differences, so I have to do something different. By this time, obviously, I was already learning everything I needed to learn. I started identifying people I could rely on, relied very heavily on court officers, because they are your eyes and ears and the people who can most efficiently get your message across in court, right? And then started building I started building the collaborations when it happened, because I was like, oh my God, what is happening? They did not tell me that this was gonna happen. So I reached out to other departments, to the child welfare agencies, because they were the experts at foster care. They do it, right? They knew. They had analysts and all these fancy positions that we didn't have. I didn't have anybody to call. And to the county and to the state. So starting within and learning everything. And then I realized that if you want to treat the clients like individuals, you also have to individualize your learning process. So the conversations that I had with court officers and the conversations I had with supervision deputies and intake deputies and placement deputies, obviously, and supervisors was different. It was very much tailored to what their role was in the placement process. So I literally went unit to unit and made sure that the training and the materials was very specific to that unit's role. And in some instances, I had to break it up because I needed for them to understand. For example, for people who don't understand what I'm talking about. So in our investigations unit, you're typically working on a brand new case, first referral, right? In supervision, you might be referring a child who you've been supervising for 2 years already on probation. So that's gonna look very different. And obviously court kind of speaks for itself. They were really the folks who could get, stop the train from derailing in court because they had the information to answer the questions. So distinguishing between the type of people who need to know different information really went a long way. So then I'm a writer. I love writing. I went to school, for criminal justice. Obviously, I took English classes for fun. My friends make fun of me. But it matters, and it matters so much when your judges like to keep it old school. And it matters so much when you have to reimagine what progress looks like for an individual child, and it's not as black and white as it was yesteryear. I always use the example of kids that we have that, were committing armed robberies, okay? And they went to treatment, and they're doing great, but they go home, and they cut a couple classes. And that's a violation of probation. But it's up to us to be able to articulate the scope of this particular child's progress, right? And maybe cutting class is a big deal for some other kid, but for the kid who used to be robbing little old ladies, I think we need to understand that there's a much bigger scheme at play, and this kid has made a lot of progress because they're not robbing little old ladies anymore, right? But you have to be able to explain that progress in these placement reports, because placement is very unique in that it's one of the many units where you actually, as a PO, are writing on a continual basis, like a planned continual 5.5 month, 6 month basis, if you're lucky, right? And there's no problems, unlike some of the other positions. So really honing in on the writing was a big deal, and making sure that it wasn't cookie cutter, that each progress, court report that you write is tailored and gives the full scope so that folks really understand what was going on with this particular youth. And then every conversation was teachable. I talked before, I would tell court officers, because they had this thing where if there was a problem or the judge had an issue, they would automatically subpoena the person who signed the report. And that wasn't me. It was just my, placement stuff that was in there. And I would say, no. Tell them to call me, subpoena me, I'm coming. And so I would sit on that stand and it would be class in session. Everybody's writing feverishly because please do subpoena me so I can tell you what the proper way to handle this is, or why we said yes or no, or what factors we were looking at, because every conversation needed to be a teachable moment. And then don't assume that people know what your struggles are in your placement unit, because like I said, even in placement, some of the placement people don't understand the struggles, right? And you may have a really different perspective. And your partner agencies, it's interesting because probation, like in the referral, you looked at 6 or 7 categories, right? Whereas behavioral health might be focused on behavioral health and education is focused on education. But we're looking at a broad spectrum and we're taking all this information together and sharing it in a way that needs to be clear. And certainly don't assume that your administration knows what your issues are. You have to tell them. You have to use your opportunity to share what's happening and see the way. I tell people all the time, for years, I went to supervisors meetings and at first I'd be like, oh, these people don't know what I'm talking about. They don't even know what a CFT is. Like, that's what I was thinking. But every time I got an opportunity to talk, I would say, so there's this thing called family finding, and they say they need the placement unit to do it, but really y'all should be doing it when you first pick up a file. And so I would always try to shed some light on the fact that placement is all of our responsibilities, because if we make that our focus to prevent placement or to expedite the process so that our kids aren't languishing, then we win, right? So then I had a revision party because Lord knows we love to keep a document in circulation that's not working. Whew. And it is not just probation people, okay? You will look at this document and your people and your unit will give you this form, and we know that something is missing and we got to type this missing information in every time, but we refuse to revise the template and add a checkbox, right? I was my first unit as a supervisor. I had a staff-related issue with attendance, and the person just knew that he was correct and he was going to show me, and he pulled a document, it's embarrassing, to show me that he was right about whatever the process was that was dated like 1982. I was like, sir, I was 3, okay? This is not, I'm gonna need some more, at least, let's move into the 2000s at least. So you have to, this is important, because if you got people that are spinning their wheels on documents that aren't functional, then we're constantly repeating ourselves and correcting the same mistake over and over and over. And let's be clear that some of us have adversarial relationships, unfortunately, with our court partners or public defender's office or whoever. And when you're sending things to court and they're not functional, they're incorrect, they're inadequate, you got the wrong chief's name at the top of the memo. I know it's not just us because we did it. That one little thing will discredit all the work and all the stuff that you put in there, because now probation is inconsistent and they're not even paying attention to the chief's name. So why would we trust their opinion? This happens. I've been there. I was a court officer for like 4 years. So documents are important. So keep revising the revisions. It's okay to change something before your annual review, right? If it's not working, get your team together or do it yourself, whatever you got to do, keep revising the revisions. So these are some of the things that we revised that I was talking about. If you want to see, just let me know. We added specific criteria for STRTPs and resource families in our internal placement screening tool. We added specific behavioral, medical, prevention-related questions. We would get referrals specifically from supervision units usually, where like the kid's been on probation for a year, there's been no violations until now, and you're screening him for placement. I'm sorry, what have we been doing for 11 months? I need to know that. Were there referrals that you made that went unanswered? Is the family unresponsive? Did they maybe go to therapy and whatever and it just didn't work? So now we got, tell me that. I need to know that. So we added more specific information. We added questions about supportive adults because, again, we need a team. Even if this child is not going to go to placement, these people could be your respite. They could be your support. So those are some ideas there. With our interagency placement committee forms, we added space for denial reasons. We added, because you shouldn't just assume that the kid is going to be admitted. You should be prepared to answer the, okay, if not placement, then what are we going to do, right? We added a behavioral chart because, like I said, we found ourselves writing the same thing over and over because typically our kids have a lot of similar characteristics when they're coming to the placement unit, right? We added components about step downs and step ups, and then we created a second level review form that includes now exit and transitional information. So really we aligned our forms to really cover prevention, placement, and whatever the other option might be that might not be placement, because I think we have to be realistic, right, about placement as well. And then on the actual referrals, we are trying to be more uniform. So we started to figure out ways to use forms that which, because you know we love a form. We tried to use ways to use things that already existed for multi-purpose, really is the point of that. And then honestly, we stopped referring to programs that couldn't meet the needs by definition. Like by the end of 2018, if you didn't have at least a provisional license, then we didn't send you a referral. Because for me, that was like we're lying, right? CCR said you have to have these qualities in order to be in an STRTP. And if you're a group home, then you can't meet those needs. So we're not referring to you anymore. And that's how we looked at it. So accountability was a big thing for us, like really holding programs accountable for what they said they could do when we sent the referral. And then we rethunk everything. And we still do, because you have to think differently about it if you're going to cover everything from start to finish. So if not placement, then where? We had to start looking at prevention efforts and imminent risk evaluations differently. We had to identify the services and needs for youth who are too risky to be in an open setting. I think we need to be real about that, because a lot of times people will say, oh, but look, you know, he's diagnosed with so-and-so and such, so he's eligible, but that doesn't mean he's suitable. And I think if we're gonna say no, then we have to consider what that means and if maybe placement is right in the future. And then again, get clear about youth who should not be in open settings and be willing to collaborate internally to create bridges to some of those other units that might deal with those kids. Because we have had a plethora of kids who have been in an institutional setting, and we were the step down option, honestly, because they still needed intensive therapeutic services when they left those settings that addressed the violence and those other factors that weren't appropriate for foster care settings. So just a note on imminent risk, and a note on imminent risk. What I realized is after the end of 2020, I became responsible for prevention services, all right? And so a lot of you know this in probation, we also have to do evaluations for imminent risk. And when I was thinking about what I did with prevention, I realized, here's those 3 categories again. Everything that reformed the way that we evaluate for imminent risk fell in the same categories: train, revise, rethink, right? Identifying issues, finding experts, individualizing training, revising our documents so that they worked for us and we weren't getting dinged over a checkbox that didn't exist on the form, right? And rethinking what we consider to be imminent risk. And so this next slide is really just to show you a visual of my misery. I'll just say it that way. So do any of you use JBI to track your, okay, so you know how this works. So basically, for those of you who don't know, the probation department, we evaluate youth for imminent risk to enter placement factors. That comes with a specific form, and then we generate a case plan depending on what the outcome is. And JBI, Justice Benefit Inc., is a company that sort of tracks our moments. And moments are associated with things that you do that are Title IV-E eligible, so for claiming purposes, right, on these youth cases that are at imminent risks. And so this represents the first time I sat down with JBI on January 6, 2021. The top box talks about basically what we were doing wrong based on the moment, right? Your moment and the thing that you selected that you were doing that was a Title IV-E service has to match up with your documents. And what the top box represents is the things that were wrong about our paperwork, right? So we were saying we were doing this Title IV-E thing, but when they reviewed the case files and looked at the paperwork, it didn't have all the bells and whistles that it was supposed to have to really show that we were doing the work, which I don't doubt that we were doing, but our paperwork was not aligned with it. And then the bottom is how many moments that were reviewed. So these are things, those moments signify things where I'm sitting there working my desk and working my case, and this thing pops up and it asks me, what are you doing right now? And I say, okay, I'm working on a case plan for little Johnny. He's at imminent risk. This is a Title IV thing. Your county is gonna get some reimbursable dollars. So if you look at the green, there was one moment, people. There was one moment during that time period, which is terrible, okay? This is where we are, January of this year. Without even looking at the particulars, you can see that the numbers are very different, okay? Same thing, the top box just talks about things that didn't align with the moments. The bottom talks about how many moments. We went from one little miserable moment during that time period when it wasn't my responsibility, by the way, and look at the number of moments that we're reviewing now. This is because we trained, revised, and rethinked the process. What I will have you know is that what's super interesting for me, anyway, having done this and looked through all these numbers, is when I realized, but wait a minute, we had one miserable moment at a time when we had over 300 kids on probation. Now we're up into the hundreds during the last couple of quarters. And in January, so that very last box represents the time period that was associated with this January 22 review. We had 59 eligible moments with no mistakes. The paperwork was perfect. People were doing what they said they were doing and their paperwork was aligned. And we only had 97 kids on probation. So we went from 350 kids on probation to one little miserable moment to less than 100 in nearly 60 moments. And before that, 157. Because we're evaluating kids correctly. We rethink what imminent risk to enter foster care means. And we're putting our money where our mouth is. We do regular check-ins. We make sure that people know what they're doing, that questions are answered. For me, I do this myself with the POs. And what I do after I have these reviews is I send the POs who did the work the results. I show them how many dollars they've contributed to the county. So not only are you doing great work with this kid and you're proving it with your documentation, you're adding to the wholeness of our entire department. And that has really changed the way, that they think about it. They're invested in it. They get it. Like, oh, wow, it's working. And there's the way I feel about it now, just in case you're wondering. Our fiscal person is very happy, I will say that. So just recap, okay? So we learned race no longer factors into or determines one's socioeconomic, improving outcomes for everyone, giving folks what they need to thrive no matter where they live or how they identify. We get there by intentionally and continually prioritizing measurable change. And basically what I've described to you is kind of these 4 boxes. You have to identify the problem, acknowledge that there is a problem that exists. So whatever it is that you're working on, acknowledge that there is a problem. Acknowledge that you and your agency and your unit or whatever might be the problem, right? Identify what the resources are and collaborate, and then emphasize training and revision of practices. Training people is essential. It should be continual. You have to collaborate, but you have to be honest. You have to be transparent about what the issues are. And then individualizing everything that you do for our children, right? The evaluations, the assessments, the case plans. It should be absolutely about them and what is equitable to the way they're going to get to a full, healthy life, not what we do for everybody. And just obviously the side note that I mentioned, you have to treat your team the same way. Giving everybody the same thing that's trying to work on this project is not going to be the thing that leads you to success either. So just remember that we are people too. And then you're going to make considerate, thoughtful recommendations and analysis. And you're going to stand by it, much like you had to stand by your decisions earlier today. When you make that recommendation, it's going to show that you considered everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, and you put everything into it because you're trying to come back with the least restrictive, right, option to make the situation better. So I hope that this resonates with some of you. You know, the concepts of racial equity, I believe, can be achieved when we really align our practices, like I said, on focusing on improving outcomes and giving people what they need to thrive. treating people like individuals. Like I could have had one slide up here and it just said racial equity, treat people like individuals. Recognize the resources that already exist, especially the experience that is among us, the things that drove your decisions and the reasons why you said you were going to make those various referrals, even the things that made you waver. Think about where that comes from and why. You know, it's your experiences. Give people what they need to thrive. And that includes not only our clients, but our teams and yourself, quite frankly. And if you do that, you will make effective change. But lastly, hopefully, 17-year-old Kiki's story also tells you that you should absolutely never give up hope. Because the person whose referral you're doing could be speaking at your next CCR. Okay? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kiki. I believe I am supposed to let you know their survey will be emailed to you, so please complete that, but we have a couple of minutes. Are there any questions? Any burning questions? You have a content expert in the room, you have experience in the room. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Any questions for Kiki? All right, I'll be there next.
You don't have to share if you don't want to, but I just wanted to know, since you used your story as an example, what did happen with your referral?
You know, so the thing about, I built the referral on an actual experience because I believe that it's quite possible, and I don't know, my chief used to be in Alameda County. Did I get referred to your, okay. I don't know if it got referred. So the thing about it, and that's a great question that you ask, is, but I'm telling you that it could have because I know that I've worked on them, right? Similar ones. The thing about it is when you decide to simply close something at intake, the people, the child, the family involved may never even know that it got referred, much like a CPS referral. If no action is taken, it's quite possible that you have history and you don't even know that you have history. So that's a good question. I might have got referred, but I passed background, like I said, so you know, it wasn't a barrier. Yes, ma'am.
You said something really important that really resonated with me. You said what you needed at that time, 17-year-old Kiki, was to, for people to remove barriers. With your experience now, how as a probation officer would we be able to discern that, for example?
That's a good question. You know, the thing about my story, like I think I alluded to a little bit earlier, is there was a much bigger issue. The issue was much bigger than we were willing to acknowledge. But I think my behaviors, like somebody pointed out, I was like all about the, you know, the reaction. I was very much at my wit's end with the whole lot of situations, and quite possibly, like someone said who was up here, that was just the one time where I was like, okay, I'm over it, okay? And it was the only, it's when you're a kid in a situation like this, you can only control so much. Things often feel out of control. That's why I was such a good student, having gone to 25, or there's some I don't even remember, so it might actually be more than 25. But that's why I was such a good student, because I could control education. That was the environment that was absolutely 100% within my control. And as you can see, because I ended up raising my grades back once I got over this and I got into the 12th grade, ironically, I had more than enough credits, which was another thing that I've realized. And they still made me take 4 classes. So I really only had 2 academic classes, and I was a teacher's aide, 2 periods, and Lord, those teachers. But I left school every day at lunchtime and went to work my whole senior year. And that might have been what saved me, because I wasn't there to have any more of the conflict or to act out behaviorally because I was at my wit's end. So what I'm saying is, I think that incident, like I think you actually pointed out, was like a lash out, quite frankly, to letting people know, not on purpose, of course, but me letting people know that there was a bigger problem. Because these people at the school were not calling. I was writing my own, don't tell nobody I told you this. I was writing my own notes and signing my daddy's name. Then my report card would come and he'd be like, why are all the absences different? I'm like, oh, the system, the computers, you know, the substitute, yeah. He's like, okay, you know. But because my grades were good enough that he wasn't really tripping. But my lash out in that incident really reflected a call for help that I didn't even know I needed at that time. So if I were responding to that today as a PO, I would be looking all around. Who cares? I mean, it was a fight. But why though? Like, what's going on? And what was these referrals about? And like, what? And one of them, if you notice, was when I was 16, right? So that's what I would have, in my mind today, would have attributed whatever happened during that 16-year-old referral to why she's up here, inciting. It was really her fault though. If she would have never jumped on the table, we would have been fine.
You talked about the different opportunities that you took for teachable moments, and as your slideshow said, talks about courts, your internal, external stakeholders, all that, and did you have any problems with receptivity from those folks who are, perhaps ingrained in processes that are pretty old and that sort of thing? And if you did, what did you do about it? For those in the room who may not have perhaps as friendly a relationship with the court or with internal stakeholders as you do.
That's a great question, and I definitely had a lot of challenge. And I have to tell you, that's why becoming the subject matter expert is important. Like, people, they can take what you think should happen or what your opinion is with a grain of salt, but when you can back it up with like facts and data and code sections, and I'm telling you people, I have drafts of these memos that I would use and reuse to not reinvent the language. That was crucial, especially for the lawyer types who really need to, write a brief. So it's like knowing what you're talking about is essential when you're battling these uphill battles. And then finding those strengths and those things about that individual case that highlight it differently. I was sharing a story earlier when we had an issue with an STRTP who wanted to kick a kid out, and I had to call a TA call because they weren't doing it correctly. And I had to demonstrate for the provider who was adamant, they brought 6 people deep to this TA call with the state, that he had to go. And I was like, wait a minute, and I pulled back up his original referral and all of these tragic behaviors, right? He was fighting people and cussing people out left and right, throwing chairs, breaking stuff. And I had to point out to them, but look, he's not doing that now. Like, you want to terminate him after 6 months for something verbal? Like, look at all the progress you made with him. He's actually getting better. And it was like they had to take a pause, like, wait a minute, we didn't think about it, like that. And he ended up being able to stay, so it worked out. But again, demonstrating what the progress looks like for whatever that case was, that I was on there with the needs were for that case, and then backing it up with all the good stuff that, the ACLs and whatnot gave me to keep in my back pocket was essential.
All right, time for one more, if there is one.
This is it, people, and then I'm going to happy hour. Let's go.
All right, well, thank you again, Kiki. Let's
Thank you.
give her a round of applause. And please look out for the survey in your emails.
Please don't post all my personal business on social media. Thank you.